welcome to In Search of the Crystal Skull, an epic adventure into the realms of mediocrity. My name is Aaron.
My name is Patricia.
And we are going to be finishing off Hidden Gems Month, unfortunately, which is something I consider probably Jack Black's worst performance.
Ooh, that's gonna be harsh to say, considering that the stuff that we have seen Jack Black in with the Kung Fu Panda movies and, various other movies that he's known for, such as Shallow Hal and School of Rock. You think this is his worst performance?
Well, to be honest with you, I actually kind of like School of Rock. It's kind of a guilty pleasure for me, really. But, but really, this movie that we're going to talk about, out of all the Jack Black things I've seen, this rubs me the wrong way. I got to be honest with everybody. So,
Okay.
Okay, so shall we rewind to our film that we're going to talk about?
All right, let's do so.
Here we go. So, Be Kind Rewind is a 2008 comedy film written and directed by Michael Grandi, also starring Jack Black, Mos Def, Melanie Diaz, Danny Glover, Maya Farrow, and Sigourney Weaver. The film was appeared in January 20th in 2008 at the 2008 Sundance Film Festival. It was later shown at the Berlin Film Festival and opened in February 22nd in 2008 in the United Kingdom and in North America. So, I think one thing we should probably address before, obviously, going right into the film itself is that this did inspire a lot of people in many ways, and also probably I also commented that it may have inspired also a particular sketch on the Amanda Show as well. I don't know about you, Patricia. What did you think of the whole setup of our movie?
Okay, so I would say that the premise is actually pretty interesting. It's a pretty typical story about the people who are trying to save the neighborhood or trying to save the business. So this movie came out in 2008, and it was around the time in which when VHS tapes were out and DVDs were in, even though that we would have not known about the power that Netflix would be coming in about a few years later, where it pretty much just replaced DVDs with streaming services. So it goes back into a time in which when DVDs were the actual format where people would be watching movies and TV shows, and nobody was renting VHSs anymore. I think the last VHS tape that I can recall that I had personally purchased was the Finding Nemo VHS, and that was like around the early 2000s. After that, I replaced it with DVDs immediately. And we actually got rid of all of our VHS tapes and replaced it with DVDs. And then a little bit later on, we just went over to streaming services and we stopped buying DVDs altogether. So, yeah, it definitely goes back into a time in which when people were still using like the mom and pop VHS stores to rent off movies so that they can be able to watch it for a day and then they would return it. It's like a little bit smaller than your Blockbusters or your Hollywood Video. So it definitely does take you back into that time period. And also it goes into more of a direction where it focuses on like indie filming, where, people used anything that they had so that they can be able to film something. They had props, they had used the same actors over and over again. And, a lot of people may find that to be quite appealing and charming, especially for those who are film majors and who want to be able to start their own industry or even have their own career in films. I mean, today it's a lot easier. Like you have a camera on your phone and you can be able to like raise money with crowdfunding campaigns, so you can be able to buy the props that you need. And if you have access to things like studios, then you can be able to make a lot of things. I mean, YouTubers have been able to go above and beyond. In fact, this came out 2 years after YouTube. I'm surprised that there was never any mention of YouTube whatsoever. Especially with people such as the Angry Video Game Nerd and the Nostalgia Critic becoming really high in terms of our entertainment.
Well, I just wanted to ask you about that because, what time period does this actually take place in?
I mean, if the movie came out in 2008, we can assume that this film takes place around 2008.
Yeah, it just feels kind of dated in a way. Like I thought that this movie was taking place it has kind of like a bit of a weird 90s 2000y feel. It doesn't really feel like it. It just kind of feels like this is probably between 1999 to 2001 in some strange way.
Yeah, you're right. It does kind of feel that way, where you have like the new DVD store, which looks akin to like Blockbuster, and then you have the old VHS store, which looks like your typical mom and pop rental place, like around the neighborhood where you would go to rent for $1. And Yeah, it definitely does not feel like this movie takes place in 2008. There's no mention about social media. There's no MySpace reference. There's no references to YouTube and content creators. I mean, it definitely does feel like something that came out in the early 2000s as opposed to the late 2000s. So there's that. And also the fact that the characters are a bit sketchy. Like, I guess we could talk about Jack Black's character. So he plays a character named Jerry McLean, and he's a conspiracy theorist, a really paranoid conspiracy theorist, where he thinks about, like, the government is after him and he needs to take down the man and all that kind of stuff. I mean, the first thing that we see in the movie is that, he tries to go to a power plant and tries to demolish it because of some reason. I don't even know what the explanation of it is. It's
I was
something
going
to
to
do
say,
with
because
something.
like I do not like this character. I just don't. I just think he comes across as like extremely unlikable. And he just becomes he just basically is the he causes all the problems of the movie basically. And it's like I get like if if he had inadvertently like I mean maybe to be fair he did inadvertently like erase all the tapes and everything like that. But I just think that it was the problem is it was a problem of his own making and everything. And like there's nothing to kind of sympathize with him if anything.
No, not really.
No.
I mean, he's not like Dale Gribble, in which, like, yes, he's a conspiracy nut, but there's a lot of appealing moments to him that make him a somewhat likable character. I mean, there's a lot of things in Dale Gribble that you would not like. He's a conspiracy theorist. He talks about how the government is after us. He's the president of a gun club. And he's not exactly, he kind of manipulates Hank, Bill, and Boomhauer a lot, to the point in which he sometimes even betrays them. This is a character that you would immediately not like.
Yeah.
But there's something about him that makes him appealing, such as the fact that he's a very devoted husband and father, even though that his wife has constantly cheated on him for 13 years and his son is not even his biological son. And also, he tries to find ways to be able to solve his issues without going all paranoid, and he's able to come on top at the end. So that character is an example of a conspiracy theorist nut done well. While this character, on the other hand, is not. You're right. He is the one responsible for causing all the problems in the first place. Because he went to the power plant and he got himself electrocuted, he was the one who inadvertently erased all the tapes from the VHS rental store. And so that's when they came up with the idea of filming everything. They decided to swede all of the tapes. They start off with Ghostbusters and then they film themselves doing it. And they come out with a 20-minute product. And so then, very similar to when we were talking about UHF, where everybody is just loving the idea of just this crude, rough look of people just being passionate about what they do, so that they decide that they want to be able to have all of the films suited. So the next one is Rush Hour 2, which, out of all the films, really, Rush Hour 2, I mean, it's not even as good as the first movie, but I get it.
Well,
Rush Hour.
wasn't it the movie that was out at the time? I think.
Yes, it was, because
Yeah.
Rush Hour 3 wasn't out yet. So yeah, I guess I could see that. And then they did a lot of other films like 2001, a Space Odyssey, and then they did Driving Miss Daisy, and they did a lot of other movies. So they were able to really resonate with an audience for them to rent all of these tapes of just a bunch of guys, and then later on, Miss Falowitz decides to come along, and she wants to help out as well, and she's just as passionate as the other guys are. And then we have this whole other subplot about Danny Glover's character, Mr. Fletcher, who realizes that his business is not doing very well. I mean, he's been telling the story over to Mike, the guy who also runs the business, the VHS store, where he's telling him that Fats Waller was born in the same building where their VHS store is at, and so they want to be able to keep it as a national landmark. And so he's been telling him this, and so there's this passion about wanting to save the neighborhood, wanting to save this particular building. While he is going out on quote unquote vacation, in reality, he's eyeing the DVD store and jotting down, okay, this is what they do. I need to be able to do this to get my business going, because I've been told over by, the real estate place that they're going to shut down the building and they're going to renovate the entire neighborhood to make it fresh and new, because it's a rundown neighborhood with nothing there for people to go to.
Hmm. So, the one thing the one thing is the neighborhood itself. Like, they get everybody involved in the act, in obviously producing all these movies, and then obviously Mr. Fletcher comes back, and then he says, "Oh, hang on a second, you can't, no, you can't just do all of this. It's like, it's not the future. It's all these DVDs that we need to do." So, to me, like, this must take place, like, I would say at the very beginning of the millennium, at least, like, because when was DVDs like starting to become popular at that point? I'm trying
Well,
to think.
technically DVDs did start at around 1995, but it was only around the early 2000s when it started to become a lot more mainstream, where they would have things released on VHS and DVD around the early 2000s, and then like toward the late 2000s, VHS tapes weren't even done anymore, and then around the 2010s, that was when Blu-rays came along, and then nowadays we have streaming services.
Yeah, so so it seems to me that the way that they're placing this movie seems to be kind of like at that particular point. So obviously he's on that, but then they come up with this plan of like just sticking like CDs to like the boxes and saying like, hey, this is like the new format or something like that,
Yeah.
which I thought was kind of like, nah, like that's just that just sounds kind of dumb. But
Yeah, it is kind of dumb, but considering that we don't know what time period this takes place in, like, I mean, I guess, when making this movie, I'm sure that Michael Gondry had no idea that the internet would take a major step up in terms of how we get our entertainment nowadays. I'm sure that he would have had no idea about the massive impact of Netflix or YouTube would make. So there's no mention of it whatsoever, and I think that that kind of hurts the film a little bit, considering of what year it came out in. Now, if it would have came out around 2005, I can completely understand this, but it came out in 2008, where we already had things like YouTube and Blip, Facebook, and we had Twitter, we had others. MySpace was still really popular. We had other social media outlets, so I guess maybe people can make the argument. It's like, oh, they come from a very poor neighborhood, and maybe they didn't have the money to, have all of this technology. But which, okay, that's completely fair. So I think that it's an actual lost opportunity that they never like tried to branch out any further than what they did.
hmm So I'm just trying to look at all the movies that they seem to have actually done. So it's let's have a look. So they did Alone in the Dark, which was a 1982
Oh,
movie,
oh
and
gosh, yes.
they
Oh,
did
the other Alone in the
the
Dark.
other
Okay.
Alone in the Dark. No, no, not that one. Like
Oh, not the Uva Bowl one. Good, good,
yeah,
good.
they did. I think they did like the Twilight Zone. They did House Party, and so it looks to me like the movies that they parodied in there looks like it would have been like movies that would have been like recognized around about that time. So
Okay, yeah,
that
that's
was
true
that.
because Rush Hour 2 came out in 2001, and I think that that was like the newest movie that they did parody.
hmm So they obviously got a lot of success from around the neighborhood, and to the point where basically they came up with all these crazy rules, or like saying that you need, and it just gets like this wild buzz around, like, oh, hey, we can get to like watch movies that are actually made in the neighborhood, which obviously seems to be a massive success for them. So it gets to the point where a lot of people like are demanding like it to. Rent movies and everything, and so they take like suggestions like for what they want to suggest have as a rented movie, and then they actually go out and make the movies themselves, and then like a couple of minutes later they come up with it. Well, like a day or 2 days later they actually come back with the movie. So
Hmm.
obviously it works in that, and so it gets wildly successful. But then all of a sudden the movie company lawyers come in and basically trash the entire thing.
Yeah, which is very justified because they are violating major copyright claims. Like, if you think that YouTube is like really strict when it comes to it, when it comes to like fair use, which of course it is. I mean, imagine having to deal with the fact that you have just made an entire movie without giving proper credit to the people behind it. So they saying, okay, you owe billions of dollars to these copyright claims of all the different companies that you ripped off with these movies. And so they had to destroy them. And all the money that they made was, was barely enough so that they can be able to save the building where Fats was born, which, by the way, it is revealed that no, Fats was never born in that particular area where they're at, which is in New Jersey, and he was never born in the building that the VHS store is at. For those who don't know, Fats Waller, it was a very famous jazz pianist around the 1920s during the Harlem Renaissance, and he was born in New York, and he did perform a few times in New Jersey, but he never lived there. So yeah, the whole thing was a complete lie, and I'm sure that jazz fans who knew about Fats Waller were like, "Wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense in the story." But I'm sure that regular people who were just watching the movie had no idea who Fats Waller is because, I mean, he's not a Louis Armstrong, he's not an Ella Fitzgerald. He's definitely like one of the more underground jazz musicians during that time period. So yeah, basically they decide that the only way that they can be able to save the neighborhood and save the video store is that they made their own fake documentary about Fats Waller called "Fats Waller Was Born Here," and so they get the neighborhood to come together. They film everything. They use crude effects. They tell this elaborate story about how he used to perform, these concerts in like New York City, and he would travel across the country and do so. And a lot of people are really invested in it. And, the whole neighborhood comes together and they start watching it and they feel really proud of all the work that they've done.
But there's the funny thing about this. It's a bit of anticlimactic as well, like because like in the Muppets movie, like they don't actually get to the goal, so they end up kind of like it's kind of like. Insinuated that they had this like one last hurrah, and then after that the neighbor got turned down. But
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Unlike UHF and unlike the 2011 Muppets movie, in which they don't accomplish their goal and the whole thing gets shut down at the end. But they're able to have like this last moment where they're able to just sit down and watch the movie that they made together, and they all cheer triumphantly of all the work they've done. And then the movie just ends there, knowing that Mr. Fletcher had decided to sell off the building and it's going to be converted into something else, and he's just going to move somewhere else, and everybody's just going to be doing who knows what. And yeah, they don't win at the end. They lose. Massive corporation takes over, which, I mean, yes, it's realistic and it's pretty inevitable considering on the status that they're at, which, many people would be like, at least, it's more realistic. But yeah, it is kind of an anticlimactic ending when you think about it.
yeah, it's just it was again, it's just it was an experience. That's all I can really say about Be Kind Rewind. And, I mean, yeah, like, I don't really like, Mos Def's, downbeat, performance in this as well. Like, I mean, you was basically like, I thought I'd get like a chuckle out of it, at least in some places, but not really. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I never really see Mos Def as like an actor. I mostly associate him with his hip hop music.
yeah, I mean, so that just kind of like was not really what I was expecting, really, and and then there's obviously I was hoping that Jack Black was going to get me through this movie, but if anything, he was more annoying than he was like just entertaining in this movie. And I don't know if that's because that's just the way that he was told to act or anything like that, or it's just like I just feel like he went through the movie and didn't have like all that many redeeming qualities. Really.
Yeah, I mean, it does play off like your stereotypical conspiracy nut. It's like, oh, I'm crazy. Oh, the government's doing this. Oh, I'm this horrible person, but I have justified reasons, even though that they're kind of nonsensical. Yeah, it does play off pretty badly, and I would say that it's one of the worst performances that I have seen with Jack Black.
So, I mean, not much else really to discuss. Like, yeah, it was something that, I'll tell you what, actually, one thing I think I will end with, and that is that, at least it did aspire to, like, the Swede, craze on YouTube, and, it did, make people, like, want to, like, take a video camera and, like, film their own, like, versions of movies and that. So, like, I guess you could say it did inspire people to, like, do their own, like, cheaply made movies and stuff like that because of the way, like, it was done. So I guess that's one good thing about it. But besides that, nah, I just think that I don't think Be Kind Rewind will be a movie I'll be revisiting anytime soon. I don't think. So
Mm. Yeah, let's see what the critics have to say about this. So, Troy Patterson from Spin says Gondry connects the guy's toil and glee with a kind of old time neighborhood hominess that's dying away and a jazz creative joy that never will. And Richard Krause says its Achilles heel is the difficulty Gondry has in switching from magical realism back to the more earthbound aspects of the story. Still, the movie has a gentle, heartfelt vibe that is hard to resist, especially if you are a movie fan. So, yeah, for those who don't know, Michael Gondry is known for doing a lot of really crazy out there indie films. You may know him for his work in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind with Jim Carrey, where he's kind of like going in and out of his own personal mindset. He's also known for doing a lot of out there music videos as well, from Bjork to Daft Punk. So yeah, he's a bit of a out there director. And so I guess maybe they thought that, since he's known for being a little bit more avant-garde, him trying to be more grounded just didn't exactly gel very well with a lot of these critics, because a lot of them do give the praise for like going back to a simpler time with like the rough neighborhood and the whole appeal of like indie movies, but everything else is not praised in the slightest. Like Peter Bradshaw from The Guardian says, Hollywood showbiz is about the now and the new. So there's something subversive about Gondry pitching his tent in the waste ground of obsolescence behind gleaming edifice in modernity. And it could work as a short film, but as a feature-length comedy, it runs dry really quickly. So yeah, there's some things that some critics liked about it, and then there's some that didn't.
yeah. So anyway, what do we think? So I mean, I got to be honest. I would rate this film a 5. Like out of 10. And the reason I say that is because there is some charm to this movie, and there is. I like the idea of like everyone coming together to like do this movie. I thought the final act, in the final third is my favorite part of like the entire movie. I think when they all just come together and like do this whole thing for a Fats Waller and that, and I think that was pretty cool in that. But for the rest of the movie, I just felt like I didn't really get invested in Jack Black being this really nutty character. I didn't really get invested in Mos Def's performance. I didn't get invested in Mr. Fletcher's spying of the other DVD store. I just felt like it's just I kind of felt a bit abstract at times, and it's I just felt like I think the 5 is probably the best thing I can give it, really. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely do agree as well. I think that with UHF, what made that movie work? The movie was able to work because it had really great characters. It was funny, and it had this triumphant moment where you got to see the people come together and being able to raise the money so that they can be able to save the studio. And you were rooting for that. And in this movie, it strips away the characters. The premise is not very unique. And also, just the fact that, the ending was a bit of a climactic way of ending it off, which I understand is more realistic, but still it just felt a little bit disappointing. I think that the parts that I really, really did enjoy about this movie were them trying to film the films that we were, going over. Like they were trying to do Ghostbusters and Rush Hour 2. They tried to do The Lion King, which I thought was actually pretty funny. They tried to do 2001, A Space Odyssey. They tried to do all of these films. And it's very commendable that they were able to do it with such crude effects and creativity. And they were able to do this really sweet documentary about Fats Waller, even though that all of the information presented to them was false. So I'm glad that they were able to, I think that as a movie fan, it's definitely has the love of it on its sleeve. I think that James Rolfe even mentioned it as like what, and according to him, his top 5 favorite movies when it comes to making movies. Which I personally think that movies such as Ed Wood does it a much better job, where you are able to root for Ed Wood, even though that he would become the worst movie director in all of Hollywood. I mean, I guess, for some people who want to make the argument about like who is the worst movie director of all time, I'm not going to go into that. But yeah, I mean, I take it that, for movie fans, especially for those who are just starting out and who have to use limited resources in order for them to get themselves started, I think it does have a charm to it. But you can do a lot better nowadays with like green screen and cameras that we easily have access to on our phones and editing websites that you can get for just a few $100s. So, we already have a much more cleaner and more refined way of making movies, especially our own movies, because we know about copyright claims, especially if you're a YouTuber. So, it does go back into a much more simpler time in which we had none of that stuff. So I can understand how it appeals to those fans. But as for like everything else, it just falls apart.
Hmm. So that ends our adventure into hidden gems. So stick around, and we will be announcing very soon what the next bunch of movies are going to be for the next month. So until
Yeah,
then,
absolutely. I'm really looking forward to talking about next month because I know for a lot of people they're going to be excited about it.
okay. All right, everybody, take care, and bye for now.
See you later.